Why now is the time for change? Well, rising homeowner discontent, we've seen it all over the state. Back in 2005, and by the way, I am not a politician. I'm a grassroots activist, I'm retired, and this is my full-time unpaid job. And I was given the opportunity to work very closely with Representative Jim Cox on crafting this bill. But going back to 2004, when I started working on this issue, and working with Representative Sam Rohrer on the first drafts of this bill, the problem then was about $8 billion in school property taxes. Had a very simple plan to eliminate them. It went nowhere. And now we're looking, instead of $8 billion, we're looking at replacing $12.7 billion. That's why homeowners are upset. In 2004, the PCTA was 6 local taxpayer groups. Now we're 84. I think that says something about the breadth of the problem in Pennsylvania and how many people are affected by it. The Act 50, Act 72, and Act 1 failures are becoming a thorn in the side of everyone. Another reason to make the change now. Pressure from taxpayer groups and the media. We've heard it come back from the Capitol. There are those who are aware of our presence. They know we're there. It's funny, we had a little rally in the Capitol last summer, and it was overheard by one of the folks, the staffer mentioned it. One of the Senate, I believe it was the House staffer, said that these property tax people are everywhere, they're like cockroaches. Thank you very much for the compliment. We appreciated that. And diminishing opportunity to fund property tax replacement from a state-level source, and this is really important. The plan in 2004 called for broadening the base of the sales tax to include more items and services, but lowering the rate to 4.25%. That would have completely eliminated the $8 billion in local school property taxes. Now we're looking at $12.7 billion. It's not that simple anymore. And the plan we're going to talk about tonight was actually as a blended funding stream that uses partly the sales tax, partly the income tax, and a few other smaller revenue generators. But the fact is, we are looking at the maximum political limit on what state taxes or what state taxes we can raise to finance this. If we don't get it done soon, we're going to get past the practical limit for doing it because people won't want to pay the increased state taxes, and we're almost at that point right now. We are losing the opportunity to fund the property tax replacement from a state-level source. July 2014 Arizona State University job growth rankings for Pennsylvania. Keep this in mind because I'm going to come back to it later and tell you why it's important. Pennsylvania was ranked 36th of 50 states in job growth with a rate of 1.19%. Go back 1 year, Pennsylvania was actually negative in job growth. And this is a direct reflection of our business climate. I'll talk more about it later, but remember that, 36th of 50 for job growth, and the rate's 1.19%. The Tax Foundation, a little over a year ago, issued a white paper called Location Matters, a comparative analysis of state tax costs on businesses for Pennsylvania. We are 49th of 50 for new firms who want to establish here, 50th of 50 for mature established firms. Nobody wants to set up shop in Pennsylvania, and I think the only reason new firms scored better than established firms, who knows what a KOZ is? Know about KOZs? Keystone Opportunity Zones. Targeted areas of tax relief or tax abatement for new businesses who want to locate there. The one most familiar to me is Cabela's in Hamburg. They were offered a 10-year property tax abatement to come and set up shop in Pennsylvania, and they jumped at it. And it's turned into a huge development right around Cabela's with all sorts of new stores, construction, businesses. It's been a great boost. Think about it for a second. If we can attract business with targeted tax abatements, why not open up the state? Make the whole state a KOZ. Welcome businesses to Pennsylvania by getting rid of the school property tax and easing that burden and welcoming businesses to Pennsylvania. Bottom line, runaway property taxes are destroying Pennsylvania's economy, devastating job-producing small businesses, and driving away its residents. And we've heard this time and again, how young people do not want to stay in Pennsylvania because of the tax climate. They would rather go someplace else where they can earn a living without having to put up with the property taxes and other Pennsylvania taxes. Young people, college graduates, our future are getting out of this state. One more thing. Anybody know what the largest industry in Pennsylvania is? Agriculture. Excellent. Absolutely, and I can't tell you how many times I've given this talk. when a farmer or someone related to a farmer has come up to me afterwards and told me the story about how they have been selling off pieces of their land, chunk by chunk, to be able to pay the property taxes each year. The largest industry in Pennsylvania, we are devastating it with the school property taxes because the farmers can't afford to pay it anymore. There's the solution. Replace the school property tax with a more broad-based and equitable tax system. We're talking about House Bill 76, Senate Bill 76. Identical legislation introduced in the House by Representative Jim Cox, introduced in the Senate by Senator David Argall, Senator Mike Fulmer, Senator John Udicak, and Senator Judy Schwank. What's notable about the Senate version is that Senators Argall and Fulmer are Republicans, Senators Udicak and Schwank are Democrats. 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, prime sponsoring this bill in the Senate. Let's talk about it. Dean mentioned that I was involved in writing this bill, and yeah, more or less, but Jim Cox is really the one who introduced it, and Jim gave us the opportunity, the PCTA, the opportunity to help craft this legislation. I was the designate of the PCTA to work with Representative Cox in putting this bill together. And the day we started on this was in November of 2010. We took a trip to Harrisburg to talk with the House Finance Committee, and on the way back we discussed what we wanted to do with this compared to previous versions of the bill. We said, let's start from scratch and look at what we want to accomplish. So here were the goals we came up with that day, and they haven't changed since then. First of all, total elimination of the school property tax. Second, total elimination to be phased in over a 2-year period. First year, freeze the property tax at its current level. Second year, it goes away completely, with one exception that I'll explain in a minute. Total elimination of school board taxing ability, with one exception, that the school board will never be allowed to impose property taxes again. Stabilization of school funding. Well, let me expand on that for a minute. Conventional wisdom is that property taxes are the most stable form of taxation. Well, I guess when you're holding a gun to somebody's head, they're going to do what they have to do.
That's right.
If you're threatened with losing your home, you're going to do everything you can to pay those taxes to keep your home. The fact is, it doesn't matter. First of all, you have people losing their homes. That's money off the tax rolls. But I'll give you one glaring example. This is the Upper Merion School District in Montgomery County. Upper Merion has a very large manufacturing concern, pharmaceutical manufacturing, GlaxoSmithKline. In 2008, Glaxo appealed its property tax assessment, which, by the way, a lot of homeowners are doing right now, too. Glaxo appealed it. The Upper Merion School District fought it. It went through the courts, took 2 years to get there, but in the end, GlaxoSmithKline was granted a $2 million annual reduction in their school property taxes. It's $2 million less the Upper Merion School District had that had to be made up from the other taxpayers' pockets. The real upshot to that was, because it was in the courts for 2 years, Upper Merion had to rebate $4 million to GlaxoSmithKline for the time it was tied up in the courts. But in any event, more and more homeowners and businesses, because of the housing downturn in 2008, are appealing their property tax assessments, are getting reductions. I don't want to hear about the stability of the property tax. It is not a stable form of taxation. And in fact, it's been shown that over time, both sales tax and income tax are more stable than the property tax. And I missed one there. Establish realistic limits on K-12 spending. I'll expand on that in a minute. Next thing, the elimination tax swap had to be revenue neutral for 2 reasons. First of all, for fairness. But second, Governor Corbett has signed the Americans for Tax Reform No Tax Increase pledge. So if the replacement revenue generates any more than is necessary to replace the school property tax, he will veto the bill if he wants to hold to the pledge. It's financed through a moderate expansion of the sales tax base to include more items and services with exemptions for necessities. Let me move through my notes here. In the expansion, gum, candy, magazines, and haircuts. Food not on the WIC list. Anybody familiar with the WIC list? Stands for Women, Infants, and Children. It is a list issued by the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture through the federal government guidelines that is a list of nutritionally sound foods. You can live on what's on the WIC list. If you like Oreos and Doritos, sorry, you're going to pay sales tax on them. But anything in the WIC list is exempt. any individual item of clothing with a value of $50 or more. How many of you in the room tonight are wearing something more than $50? Okay, so very few of you. So again, it doesn't hit you right away. It's only certain limits. Exemptions. Food stamp purchases, all utilities, home heating fuels, all exempt from the sales tax, tuition, health, hospital, and dental services, prescription drugs, home health care. I've seen people write newspaper editorials, oh, drugs are going to be taxed, doctor's visits are going to be taxed. No, they're exempt. Now, depending on what you apply the sales tax to, there's an instinctive objection saying, oh, we shouldn't tax this or we shouldn't tax that. In fact, one of the prime sponsors, Dave Argall, his wife said we shouldn't tax shoes. Actually, has a closet full of shoes, I'm sure has no bearing on that. But you'll hear instinctive objections to things we should or should not tax. So I'm going to put this to you in a different way. Look at it objectively. Take your school property tax and divide by 0.07. That's going to be the new property tax rate. The average school property tax statewide is $3,500 a year. Divide that by 0.07, you find you'd have to spend $50,000 annually on newly taxed items and services to equal the amount of property tax eliminated. When you look at it in an objective way, does it really matter what's added to the sales tax base? Because you're never going to be able to spend enough on that to equal the amount of property taxes you've had eliminated. Looks to me like I bounced one slide ahead. Sure did. Increase the state personal income tax rate to 4.34%. It's currently 3.07. That's about a penny and a quarter increase on each dollar of earnings. The Act 1 gambling revenue currently allocated to property tax relief. That's about $800 million a year. Looking at it for $12.7 billion, it's not that much, but it's there. You don't need it anymore for property tax relief. Throw it into the pot. And I mentioned about a small piece of retained property tax, that the school board will still have some property tax. And I want to explain this thoroughly so you understand it, because it is thoroughly misunderstood. When we were crafting the bill, we looked at replacing $12.7 billion, and the numbers on both the sales tax and the income tax were coming in way too high. I said, well, what else can we do about this? We looked at North Dakota, of all places, who also was looking to eliminate their property taxes, and came up with the idea of leaving existing debt with the school districts that incurred it. So what the bill says is, at the time of enactment, actually, December 31st, 2013 is the cutoff point. Any debt on a school district's books as of December 31st, 2013 can be financed through local property taxes at whatever rate is necessary to pay down that debt, and that's it, no more. And when the debt is paid off, the remainder of the property tax goes away completely. We found that statewide, the average school district debt service is about 10% of their budget. So in school districts that are carrying debt, you'll see about a 90% reduction on average until the debt is fully paid off. Highest one we found in the state was 18% in one school district. They will still see an 82% reduction until their debt is paid off. We found 28 school districts in the state that are carrying no long-term debt whatsoever, and their property taxes will be eliminated in year 2. So just so you understand, I've heard people say, oh, the property tax is going to continue at its current level, and then the school district can add more to it. No. The bill is very specific about that. Only the amount necessary to service existing debt, and when that's paid off, it goes away. The school district is not allowed to add any more property tax to it, period. Property tax replacement revenue is to be placed in the Education Stabilization Fund, the segregated lockbox account. Come on, where are the groans? Everybody groans when I say that, because you talk about the Social Security lockbox and the way it's been rated, but it's a little bit different in Pennsylvania. On the federal government level, yes, you can borrow from the Social Security Trust Fund and then borrow money to replace it to pay out the benefits. We don't have that in Pennsylvania. You can't borrow money to do that. The whole idea of the Education Stabilization Fund is not so much to keep it from being rated, but for transparency. Every dollar that is generated in replacement revenue goes into the ESF. Every dollar that is dispersed is shown in the ESF. We can see everything that's happening, and that's the point of it. Now the funding, the opposite side of the coin. The Secretary was talking about how much money we're going to need to fund the schools. We were $4 billion short, and I asked the question, how much is enough? Ever? I think we have to set limits on it. What HB and SB 76 do? There is no distribution formula. All school districts are fully funded dollar for dollar for the total amount of local taxes eliminated, no redistribution of wealth. If a school district loses $2 million in school property taxes, they are replaced $2 million from the state. One of the complaints I've heard is the fiddling with the current funding formula from the state, how certain areas or certain districts get a little bit more money, get favored status in what their districts get. Can't happen here because it is very strictly defined as dollar for dollar replacement. The annual funding increases are based either on the increase in the Pennsylvania average weekly wage or available revenue, whichever is less, allocated to each district on a percentage basis, equally. No fiddling with it to give favored districts. Point of that whole thing is, that's the cost control built into the bill. In general, the cost of the replacement revenue cannot rise any greater than the rate of inflation, or in this case, the average weekly wage, which means a person's ability to pay the tax. It's going to take that black line that I referred to earlier, that property tax line, and start to flatten it, so it gets more in sync with the average weekly wage and the rate of inflation, which is what we're going to have to do if our education finance system in Pennsylvania is going to survive. The school districts will be allowed one form of taxation. You can't leave them twisting in the wind because they're going to have legitimate needs for more revenue. They are allowed to impose either a local earned income tax or a local personal income tax, but through no exception referendum only. For specific projects, the referendum must state the purpose of the project, the cost of the project, the tax rate that will be imposed, and a sunset date for that tax, so you know when it's going to end. The school district can also use it for general fund revenue if they want to, but they have to have a referendum every 4 years to renew the tax. One of the greatest arguments we've heard against the bill, and this is coming out of the House GOP leadership, Representative Mike Turzai of Allegheny County, who screams about, you lose local control. This addresses that. First of all, local control. The Pennsylvania School Code is more than 1,300 pages. If you look up all the references in it to other statutes, it almost doubles to about 2,500 pages. This is the school code. Talk about local control. What we're talking about with 76, the only local control that's lost is the ability of any 5 school board members to raise your property taxes at will. Period.
All right. All right.
You want to talk about local control? Having a referendum for tax increases and expenditures, letting the voters speak their mind, that is the essence of local control.
That's right.
Legislation is to be implemented for replacement of local school district property taxes only and is not to be integrated in any way with the current basic education subsidy. That will still continue to be determined by the General Assembly. As I mentioned, General Assembly, the executive branch, like to meddle a little bit in the way the funds are distributed. We didn't want to play in that sandbox. It is filled with conjecture, and we said no. Let's just replace the property tax. Original versions of the bill called for putting it all, everything, the state funding, the property tax replacement money into one big pot and driving it out. Not this time. Let's just get rid of the property tax and do it as simply as possible. And the way to do it is to stay away from the current subsidy, let the General Assembly worry about that. And introduction of concurrent legislation proposing a constitutional amendment to forever abolish school taxes as a funding source. Anything enacted through statute can be repealed the same way. This is the guarantee that school boards will no longer ever be able to impose a property tax in Pennsylvania again. The legislation, Pennsylvania Independent Fiscal Office, I guess you'd say it's like the Congressional Budget Office, does independent studies for the General Assembly of various legislation to see how the numbers work out. They've done 2 studies, in fact, on House Bill and Senate Bill 76. One that was released in 2012, one that was released in 2013. The legislation is in full fiscal compliance with the financial analysis conducted by the Pennsylvania Independent Fiscal Office that was released on October 1st of last year. I'm going to expand on that. The IFO, besides the numbers, had some comments at the end. Here's a few of them. The elimination of school property taxes increases the disposable income of property taxpayers. The analysis assumes that 70% of the property tax cut goes to individuals, which is about the right proportion. 70% to individuals, about 30% to businesses. It further assumes homeowners spend 90% of the increase in disposable income. If your school property taxes are $3,000, what are you going to do with that money when it's put back in your pocket?
Spend it.
Going to spend it? Somebody said to me at a presentation I gave a couple of weeks ago, I'd fix up my house. Which is really double-edged, because not only do you have the money to fix up your house, but you don't have to be afraid to fix it up for fear the property tax assessor is going to come out and raise your assessment.
All right.
But consider the ramifications of this. We're talking roughly, residential property tax is about $10 billion a year. Now some of that's going to be paid in the replacement taxes, obviously, but it's going to be spent too. Stimulus for Pennsylvania's economy. The federal government borrows money to inject into the economy to give it a stimulus. We have this right in front of us. What is $10 billion pumped back into Pennsylvania's economy annually going to do for our economy? And you start spending it, you're going to pay more sales tax, which is only going to boost revenue for the schools. This is a no-brainer.
Yes.
And it's so difficult for some in Harrisburg to see it because they're too interested in keeping the special interests happy. The analysis indicates the legislation will cause home values to increase on average by more than 10% statewide. You know what happened to home values in 2008 during the housing downturn. And if you get a chance, go to the PTCC website. In the right column, there's an essay by a real estate professional who talks about how every time your property taxes go up, the value of your home goes down. We've seen this in Monroe County in the Poconos. They're probably the poster child for the problem in Pennsylvania. Typically, a home in the Poconos at the average sale price in Pennsylvania of $200,000 will have a property tax load of $10,000 a year. 5% of the value of the home every year. You could pay off the house at that rate in 20 years, but you still have 10 years to go on the mortgage. What it's doing, though, the property values in Monroe County are in the flusher. They can't sell homes. Representative Mario Scavella, who is from Monroe County, told me they have 3,000 walkaways in the county. People that just couldn't afford it anymore walked away, left the house sit. It's not generating any revenue, and God forbid you should own a house in Monroe County because you're never going to be able to sell it. Who's going to buy a $200,000 house knowing you're going to pay 10% of that value every year and no end in sight? It's going to continue to go up. This will help to increase home values across Pennsylvania. And by the way, Pennsylvania Association of Realtors is a strong proponent for this because they understand what it will do for Pennsylvania's housing market. And have you noticed the recession from 2008? We keep seeing supposedly encouraging signs that things are improving, but they don't seem to be improving all that much. Previous recessions, always, it was the housing market that led the way in recoveries. Working age homeowners realize a tax cut. The analysis finds that the increase in federal income tax through lower itemized deductions, if you itemize in Schedule A, you're not going to have the property tax to deduct anymore. However, the IFO says that the increase in federal income tax through lower itemized deductions, state income tax, and sales tax is more than offset by the reduction in property taxes. They also said retired homeowners realize a significant reduction in taxes. The analysis finds that the property tax reduction easily offsets any increase from the higher sales tax. The elimination of school property taxes would significantly reduce the property tax share and would clearly increase the attractiveness of the Commonwealth for business location and expansion. Remember those numbers I gave you earlier about businesses in Pennsylvania and how they're taxed? I like that more than anything else in the IFO analysis. Would clearly increase the attractiveness of the Commonwealth for business location and expansion. More businesses in Pennsylvania, a boost to the economy, and jobs. And we hear so often coming out of Harrisburg, I'm going to bring more jobs to Pennsylvania. Pray tell, how? This'll do it. The IFO says so. You bring businesses to Pennsylvania, you're going to create jobs. I'll give you an example of this. York County, we had a businessman down there. He opened a truck servicing business about 10 years ago. And He grew the business very nicely, had 9 employees, grew it in fact so well that he wanted to open a second location. He found another location on the opposite side of the city. It would have suited his needs quite well. He had his attorney investigate it and found that the property taxes on it were in excess of $12,000 a year. He said, no, not happening. Where'd he go? Crossed the border into Maryland and opened up his second location there and took the economic stimulus from Pennsylvania and the jobs that would have been created. This can help. Benefits would also accrue to home builders, home developers, and other landowners who convert current land holdings into new housing plots. And employment would increase in the construction sector as well. This is straight from the Independent Fiscal Office report. And regarding business entities, the income flows through to individuals as higher disposable income. For pass-through entities, the analysis assumes the owners and shareholders spend 90% of the increase. 70% is spent on taxable goods and services, we've heard that number before, yielding another secondary effect of $34 million in increased sales taxes for fiscal year 2013-14. $34 million, and that's just for the 30% of the property taxes that belong to businesses. What about the 70% for homeowners? We're looking at what? Rough numbers? An extra $100 million a year in sales tax revenue? That's nothing to sneeze at. There's an argument that we shouldn't eliminate for businesses, only for homeowners. I think, first of all, this pretty much proves the point that it's worthwhile eliminating for businesses. Second point is, uniformity clause of the Pennsylvania Constitution says you cannot have different rates of taxation for entities in the same taxing body. In order to eliminate for homeowners and not for businesses would require a constitutional amendment that is a multi-year process, including a taxpayer referendum. It's been tried twice in the past 4 years, has not even gotten past past the House, much less the entire General Assembly twice. We cannot afford to wait for a constitutional amendment. We've got to get this done now, and the way to do it is to eliminate for everyone. And finally, this is why we in the PCTA are so passionate about this bill. We were given a unique opportunity to help craft a piece of legislation in Pennsylvania. When does that ever happen? I've heard the standing jokes coming out of Harrisburg that the lobbyists will come in, prop their feet up on the desk, and dictate bills to certain lawmakers. We never have a chance to have our voices heard like this, and I give everything I have to Representative Jim Cox for allowing us this opportunity. We worked for 18 months to craft this bill, and in the PCTA, we approved everything that's in it. We discussed everything, and this isn't slapdash legislation. This was put together over a long period of time with a lot of thought put into it. What's amazing about this is we've seen the gridlock in Washington, we've seen the gridlock in Harrisburg. The parties can never come together on anything. We are a very diverse group that goes from full left to full right, and somehow we as individual taxpayers have managed to come together with a solution that we can all agree on that helps the people of Pennsylvania. I think we've done a little bit better than the Harrisburg and Washington politicians.
Yes.
This is where we stand right now. In the House of Representatives, 86 co-sponsors, 58 Republicans, 28 Democrats, a 67 to 33% split. In the Senate, and by the way, the bill is essentially dead in the House of Representatives. Representative Mike Turzai, the House GOP Majority Leader from Allegheny County, absolutely refuses to allow the bill out of committee. I guess the fact that he's taken about $500,000 in campaign donations from the Bar Association, the trial lawyers, and individual attorneys, and he's an attorney, has nothing to do with it, I'm sure.
Right.
He will not allow the bill out of committee. In the Senate, currently 25 co-sponsors, we had 26. Several months ago, the Pennsylvania State Education Association, the teachers union, sent out a poison pen letter to a number of senators, and one of them got it and decided they were going to get off the bill. So we were 26, we're now 25, but look at the split. 13 Republicans, 12 Democrats, 52-48. How many bills in Harrisburg of this magnitude have that kind of bipartisanship? Darn few. Where it stands in the Senate. It's in the Senate Finance Committee now. It's still eligible for a vote. The bill has not been run yet because of some uncertainty as to whether or not the bill would pass in the Finance Committee. Senator Wozniak is here tonight. He's on the Finance Committee, and we hope that he will vote for the bill in Finance if it is run within the next several days. There's only 11 session days left, starting on Monday, very short period of time, and if they run the bill, I hope the senator will be willing to vote for the bill in committee, and of course on the floor. In Cambria County, you have 3 representatives. You have Senator Wozniak as the senator. 3 representatives are Brian Barbin, Frank Burns, and Gary Holiska. Brian Barbin and Gary Holiska are both co-sponsors in the House. Frank Burns is not. If the bill should pass the Senate within the next week or so and go over to the House, I would hope you would encourage your representatives to please vote for the bill in the House. I think we're going to see a very interesting political dynamic if the bill passes the Senate and goes over to the House, because everybody's predicting if it gets through the Senate, it's going to get huge media attention, and the pressure on the House is going to be tremendous. So I would hope you help to apply that pressure too if we get it through the Senate over the next few days. Most of all, this is a clean bill. There's a lot of legislation in Harrisburg that contains perks either for individual lawmakers or for special interests who finance their campaigns. We did this bill. We, as ordinary taxpayers. And we made sure there is nothing in it to benefit anyone except the children and the taxpayers of Pennsylvania. Period. Common objections. Loss of local control. I think we talked about that. We shouldn't tax clothing, books, flags, whatever. We talked about that. Plans shouldn't eliminate for businesses. Well, I think we discussed that. And the numbers don't work. I like that one because it's the easiest excuse of all for a lawmaker to make. The numbers don't work. That throws the ball in our court to prove that they do. Okay, so let's do it. This is from the Independent Fiscal Office, from the same analysis. The only line we're going to worry about is the bottom one that says net fiscal impact. Take a look for 2014-15. We're looking at replacing $12.7 billion in school property taxes. The IFO says net fiscal impact, $3 million off from the total we need. $3 million against $12.7 billion. That's 0.0003% of the total. That's rounding error. I think it hits it right on the nose. To extend the complaint about the numbers don't work, I think that proves the numbers work. Look at the last number, 2018-19 column, that minus 1031. This is the argument that's being used to say that we are underfunding education. I beg to disagree. Let's go back to the black line again. That is actually the cost savings, and it proves that 76 is doing what it's designed to do. It's reducing the replacement revenue beneath what the increase in property taxes would have been. It's flattening that black line to bring it more into sync with the increase in inflation and the increase in the average weekly wage, and that is actually the savings over what it would have been if the property tax was still in effect. Anyone says the numbers don't work, you saw it right there. 2014-15, $3 million against $12.7 billion. Certainly sounds to me like it works. I talked about 1189, I'm not going to do it again, it infuriates me. It's discriminatory. Anyhow, I've heard so many times, I hope that they will do something about it. They meaning Harrisburg. No. Left to their own devices, they will do nothing about it. It's up to us to join together as grassroots supporters and taxpayers to get behind this bill and demand that they do what is necessary for the taxpayers of Pennsylvania. And good luck, I hope that you can do it. I can't do anything. I'm a facilitator, I go around the state talking about this bill, I try to educate people, but alone I can do nothing. Together, we have the strength to do this. And that's why I go around talking about this bill, to recruit more people to get behind the effort and work for it and support it, call their lawmakers, tell their friends and neighbors, spread the word, do whatever they have to do to get the word out there on this bill and get the taxpayer and voter support for it. We've got to get this done.